Hi, I'm Amy, and I'm joined today by my lovely friend NAOMI Gibson, who is the author of two absolutely amazing YA. I want to call them YA sci-fi romantic thrillers. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, let's go for everything. It encompasses it all.
Yeah, which is one of the things I really love about them, and we'll get to that. But first, can you tell us about your latest book, which came out in January, Game Over Girl?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on, by the way. It's really exciting.
You're very welcome.
So Game Over Girl is a YA thriller about a girl with a dark secret, and she plays a VR game, and her secret kind of unravels inside her game, basically. So yeah, it's got an unreliable narrator, and I'd always wanted to write an unreliable narrator. I think they're really fascinating. So that was basically what I pitched to my editor. I was like, it's going to be about this girl who has like this extreme daydreaming ability to the point where she like hallucinates, and she is convinced that her mother died in a train crash, and the whole book is about what actually happened. And inside her VR game, I had this really strong vision of a girl remaking the home that she grew up in inside of her game world, and on each level of her house was something that had happened to her. And she's hidden like a secret or a truth in the basement, and it's all about her going to this basement and uncovering the truth of what happened.
Oh, it's so good. I am going to go totally off piece of the questions already.
No worries.
Talking about unreliable narrators reminded me of something that I really, really liked the way you did that, because I think I find unreliable narrators, such a hard word to say, quite difficult, because sometimes you can feel cheated by an unreliable narrator. Because they hide something from you in a way that doesn't feel authentic. But you did it really, really well. Have you got any advice for doing that in a way that doesn't feel like you've cheated the reader and just not told them something?
Yeah, so I actually have this whole school presentation about unreliable narrators, and there are, in my experience when I looked into it, there are like several different types of unreliable narrators, and one of them is the liar. And I actually split that into two categories. So you can get a liar who lies to you outright, kind of thinking Kaiser Soze sort of style, like he's telling you a story and he knows it's not true and he just wants to fool you. And then you can get the other type of liar who lies because they have buried a truth, or they have a blank in their memory and they don't know what happened either. So they're not like outright lying to you on purpose. They're doing it perhaps because they have really strong trauma, like PTSD kind of thing, and they don't want to know the truth. They know what happened really, but they tell themselves a lie to overcome it, because they can't handle the truth. And so that was the kind of unreliable narrator that I went for, because I think that's kind of more sympathetic. I think the outright liar is fun to read and fun to watch, but at the end you're like, oh, he was just lying like the whole time. But if you've got like a liar who is lying to themselves, it's way more of a psychological journey, I think, to uncovering the truth. And that was kind of the bent that I wanted to write.
Yeah, that is definitely something that you do really well, I think. Writing difficult characters who are kind of not always completely sympathetic. They're not kind of these teenage girls who are, I think, in YA books, they're often quite naive, and some teen girls in YA books haven't had a lot of things happen to them. But I think your characters have these really rich and often traumatic histories. Is that something that you kind of tapped into deliberately? Because I think you've written characters that could be unlikable, but made them really sympathetic. Is that sort of a thread so far, do you think, of your books?
Yeah, for sure. I was just thinking about the one that I've written recently, and that's definitely true for that as well. I like writing characters like that because I'm fascinated by people. I'm fascinated by psychology. I think I was telling you earlier, like I grew up going to church, and as much as church might not tell you, I think there's quite a lot of gossip in churches, and so and my parents were a doctor and a therapist, and so because of all that, I just grew up talking about people, and I grew up like understanding people and what makes them tick. And it's not a coincidence that I write like psychological fiction, I don't think. But I love to explore what happened to somebody in their childhood that then goes on to inform the way they make decisions as an adult. And that is, it's just like that character study, like what was the wound that happened when they were younger that then bleeds into their later life because they still haven't overcome that trauma. And yeah, and I just find it fascinating. I think I'm just like a wannabe psychologist. I'm just like generally really nosy.
Just work it out in the book you write. It's fine. Yeah, it is interesting. So I was just thinking as you were saying that, like, it's realistic, isn't it? Because some teens will be reading our books who have been incredibly sheltered and incredibly fortunate and not had traumatic experiences. And then there'll be some teens who have been through them. There'll be some that are aware of them and want to work through those. So I think it's really important to have characters with all different experiences and all different kind of mindsets. It's really good.
Yeah.
So thank you for doing a bit in that.
Oh, no worries.
So we've talked about some of the things that you do really well, like the unreliable narrator, but I'm also interested in the science content of your books, because I find it really interesting how you use real science, which is very well researched, and because I've Googled some of the stuff, like, I don't get this, I'm just going to look it up, and it all holds up.
Oh, good.
But then you take it a step further into fiction. So it's kind of a two-part question of how do you make sure the science is right, and where do you decide that fiction takes over?
Yeah. I think that probably depends on what you're writing about. There's definitely like a relationship between humans and technology. And it's just personally, I see so many what if scenarios with that relationship, and I just really love exploring them. But yeah, there is definitely a point where fiction takes over because so I don't understand AI. I don't understand VR. I didn't do as much research for this book as I did for the AI one. But I and also my character wasn't the coder, she wasn't the hacker this time. She was kind of like a secondary user to it. So I didn't need to really understand the mechanics of how a VR game would actually work, and I didn't need her to poke around in the game engine or anything like that. But yeah, it probably just depends what point of view you're writing from and how much research you're actually going to go into. So for this one, I just knew that I just wanted this really immersive game world, which is probably kind of being developed at the moment with like metaverse and things like that, where we get this like digital twin of the earth and you can walk around in it and stuff. But as far as when it becomes fiction, I think that's probably when story takes over, and when you need certain things to happen in your plot to drive certain beats of your book, or to hit or to push your character to do certain things. That's probably when I introduce them. But because the characters that I write are quite psychological, I need them to most of my books kind of are probably character driven, so I need the characters to kind of be reacting to things that happen to them, and that probably drives my story a lot more than the actual science behind it. But yeah, I wouldn't ever write a book about, like, I don't know, I'd like to write a book in space, but I wouldn't ever write one about like building a rocket or something, because like I don't know how to do that, even if I read a book and went away. So it's picking areas that I'm aware of and I know a bit about, and I can lend that to a story. So yeah, does that answer your question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, it totally does, because I was just, as you were saying it, I was thinking I'd never really thought about it the way that you only need to know probably a bit more than your character does. Yeah. So if you're writing a VR world in which the character is the one who developed the world, you'd have to really unpick the science, wouldn't you, to make sure it held up. But she goes into it as somebody who doesn't really even use the internet much, so she's very kind of
she's very sheltered in that
respect.
So I think people just tell her things and she accepts them, and because she has no background knowledge of games, barely, she's basically only really played Snakes and Ladders. Like, she's not really ever had a computer. She just accepts things a lot more readily, and I think because you have built that background in, the reader then accepts it too. Because it's her experience and it's all in first person, so she's explained it to her understanding. So yeah,
that's cool. That's a really good way of putting it. So what was your way into this particular story? Was there something that triggered it and made you want to write it?
So I've always just been fascinated by unreliable narrators, and I knew I wanted to write about it, write one for myself. I've just got a stack of books actually, because you asked me for recommendations and
Oh
stuff,
yeah,
and
cool.
some of them are unreliable narrators, and I yeah, I think that was probably what triggered it. I wanted to write someone with a fractured memory, and I wanted to doubt. It was like kind of psychological, a lot more than my first book, I would say.
Yeah.
So I wanted to write that kind of fiction where we've got this character who doesn't know what, like, she knows what happened, but she's told herself a lie. She's like gaslit herself into believing something completely different, and it's just unraveling that truth. And I wanted to couple it with a VR game, and I really wanted it to have like a strong sense of place. And this house that she grew up in, I was like, something's going to have happened in that house. So it was kind of like several things at once, I think, came together for this book. Like with my first one, it was a prompt that I got from a writing class, so it was really clear where that idea came from. But this one, I think, was just several things that had been percolating for like a couple of years, and I was like, I'm ready to write this book now. So yeah, it was just like a few things all at once, really. How do ideas come to you?
They're really different. I was just thinking about that as you said it. So Mina and the Undead was the place. So when I went to New Orleans, it definitely started with that strong sense of place. I was like, how could a place be any more different from where I grew up? The fact that mythology is so steeped into everyday life, and there's just so many creepy stories, and like what place has an explanation of this is how vampires got here, and you're like, cool, people just accepted this is how vampires got here. So yeah, it started from that, and I just had to think, what kind of people do I want to populate this world? And so it definitely started from that. Whereas the other thing that I've just finished writing the first draft of, hooray, that just came from a completely different place, and it had been an idea, like you said, that had been one that had been in my head for probably 10 years, and I didn't know how to do it, and suddenly it just started unraveling, and I was like, oh, and that was just a plot. Cool. A little plot just came to me.
I like that.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, because I think you are obviously quite character driven in yours. Do you tend to find that the characters are something that come quite early on then? Because I think my characters quite often come a bit later, maybe.
Today, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I think characters come to me first for sure. But this one, I think it probably all happened at the same time, because I knew I wanted somebody with a fractured memory in order to trigger this journey. So it was just kind of like back reverse engineering that character to fit that scenario. But then once I got her down and what had actually happened, although because I'm kind of a pantser, I didn't actually know what had happened until I was writing it.
Brilliant. So she's going, I wonder what happened. What happened?
Yeah, so I when she goes to her basement in her VR world and she discovers what had happened, I was like, I was discovering that for the first time too. And then it was a case of editing and going back and laying like hints and red herrings and things like that to make the reader guess. But I hope that it makes sense. Like when you build in a twist and then people are like, that twist came out of nowhere, that's not good. when it like the people go, oh, I get it, that's the kind of reaction that you're looking for, because that means that you have padded it in and it makes sense, and they can look back and be like, oh, okay, that's what that meant, and this is why she did that, and etc. So
and that's the difficult thing with unreliable narrators, isn't it? Because I read a book years and years ago that had an unreliable narrator, and it turned out they had been lying to you all the way through the book, and I felt the direction it went, I felt cheating. It's so strange, isn't it, how you get this gut instinct sometimes of it worked in that case. It didn't work in that case for me, but lots of people loved it. And yet yours definitely, there was no moment where I thought, I'd have just not mentioned it if I didn't. I thought yours, you did it really well.
Thanks.
And I think with mine, like the characters, the book doesn't feel real to me until I think of the characters, until a little bit of voice. And with the one I've just written, a little bit of voice just popped into my head for this character, and she was quite kind of abrasive and a bit rude and a bit different from what I'm writing. And I just wrote this paragraph like, oh, she's interesting. Who's she? And that's when the story started to take shape. I think it's just like blobs of ideas until some characters kind of come out of the ether to just like drive it forward, I think.
I like it when that happens, when they find you, that's great.
It happens to me quite a lot, actually. I think until I start playing with the voice and decide who the characters are, I just can't move forward. Like I do quite a bit of pantsing. I need to have some sense of that, I think, before I go into it.
Yeah.
So, on a slightly different subject, we were in a similar position that our second books came out not very far from each other. Mine was obviously last September and yours this January. How was that experience of writing, having published, like the whole thing? What was the difference with the second book?
I'm sure I'm about to tell you things that you already know yourself.
No,
and
you
you've
don't
heard
surprise
plenty
me.
of times before.
Yeah.
But writing book 2 was so much harder. So like I just said, I'm kind of a pantser. I don't really like to know what I'm writing. I mean, obviously I get an idea of it and I just chase the idea. But I pitched book 2 as a synopsis. So I had this kind of story all laid out, and I knew when I pitched it to my editor, you know, it had like the beginning, it had the middle and the end. And so because I could see it, I really didn't enjoy writing it that much, even though there were some bits that I still left pants, like the twist that I knew when she went to her basement, what was she going to find there? Excuse me. So I had still had some things that I was going to pants, but because this idea had been approved, I found it really difficult to write from a synopsis. But I recognize that that is probably the way around books are written in this industry. So it's like you get this contract, and because you're in contract, you have to write a book for a certain deadline, and that book has to kind of be pre-approved a little bit, or they get an idea of what you're going to write. And I recognize that's probably the way around most are written.
Yeah, I think that is part of it, isn't it? It is the deadline. It's and also the readers' expectations, that you remember the things you've heard readers say, and like the stuff that they liked, and also the stuff they didn't like. And those things are often like, you might have heard the opposite thing from two different readers. Like, I love romance, I hate romance, and you're sitting there thinking, do I want romance? Like,
It's
so
hard,
I had to kind of, I had to shut some of that out and just go, I love romance. You know, obviously, this is continuing a story. I can't have a book without romance for Naomi to read, you know. God forgive me if I just went, just gone on holiday for like 2 weeks.
Take Jared off the page. Oh, that's rude.
I loved it when Naomi messaged me when you were reading the book, and you were like, I saw what you're doing with Will. I know you're a hot boy, but you know.
Yeah.
And
like Will's got a motorbike and a leather jacket. I was like, I see what you're doing here.
Yeah, I know. And I love that. Like, I love getting those reactions. That's what keeps me going. But I think I've discovered that when I've outlined a book a little bit more, like you said, going into this process, I find the editing more rewarding, because like the thing that I've just written, I know that the descriptions aren't as good as they could be. I know the voice isn't as good as it could be. And like some of the settings in Mina, I would have like gone to town and written like a 5-page description and then whittled it down to the bit that I want in the book. This one, I was just like, they're in a cafe having a conversation. So I know that I need to go through and add the things that I'm going to really enjoy. So I think that sometimes I find the first draft harder now than I used to, but the editing will be more fun because I'll be adding some of that stuff that I really like.
Yeah, I think this book came to fruition for me in editing as well. The first draft is so different from what it ended up as, but hopefully for the better. And as well, do you underwrite? I for this book, my first draft was like maybe 50k, maybe.
So I changed on the Mina books. I overwrote, and Mina 2 was like 100k at one point. I think I went just over 100k, and I was like, "Whoops!" The first book was 70k. What have I done? I can't have 100k.
That's amazing, 100k.
And I whittled it down, and I think it got to about 90 in the end. So it's still quite a lot longer. But the thing I've just written, I definitely underwrote, and I did a thing that I've never done before. I didn't write chapters. Like sometimes I was like, "This sounds hard. I'm just going to leave it for now." And I went back and wrote afterwards, so it'll be interesting. I haven't had a chance to read some of those back, so I wonder if they actually do fit as I think they do, or if they just appear from nowhere.
I'm sure it's all good.
See.
But I wasn't in free till the editing process that it came to full length. I think it ended up like 67. So yeah, it was definitely editing for me where the magic happened with book 2.
Brilliant. Yeah, I mean, you can always hold on to that. I think when you're drafting and it's difficult, like a teenager asked me the other day, what do you do when you've got a blank page and you're struggling, or you get halfway through something, it's not working? I was like, sometimes you have just got to finish it. And if you know it's something that's going to work, or in our case, something that you've been paid to write already, you just have to get to that end point, don't you? And then you know that you can refine it, and that the first draft generally is just for you still. Even if you're under a lot of constraints, you've still usually got a bit of time to kind of give it a go now before you send it to anybody else.
Yeah, for sure.
I'm just checking whether there's anything else that we were going to talk about. So you said that you've got a stack of books. This might be a good moment actually for you to show us what you'd recommend. So I'll be interested why you thought that people would like these books, because I asked for recommendations for fans of Naomi's books. So yeah, let us know what they are and like why you think we'd like them.
Okay. Okay, I'll start. I've got a few. Some of them are kind of like sci-fi horror. My first one is The Luminous Dead
Cool.
by Caitlin Starling, and I really enjoyed this book. I actually bought it on Kindle, and then I liked it so much I bought a paperback copy as well, because I like to do that. But it's about a woman in a cave, and she has to like go through this cave system and find something, which I can't quite remember what it is, but it's on this planet, and in this cave system there's this big kind of like worm that eats people and eats rock, and she has to like stealthily move through this cave without disrupting the worm, and she along the way she finds bodies of other cavers, and she's talking on her suit headset to the person above the ground, and they're like, oh yeah, so there's been loads of other people on the mission before you, they've all died, but you're here now, hopefully you'll win, you'll find the thing we're looking for. And it's all about this journey, and it's actually really, really scary, and it's got like a horror bent, and like the person she's talking to, she has to put a lot of trust in, and that person is not reliable at all. So it's I really like that book. That was really cool.
Awesome. You're not the first person who's told me about that. I think I do.
Oh really? Yeah,
it's it came up on a sprint, and people were like, you should read this, and I didn't know whether it was too scary for me, but I feel like I trust your level of scary probably is similar to mine, so I think
I quite like sci-fi horror, and that, I mean, it's really atmospheric, I think, horror, and like this big creature going through the ground that will eat you. I think that's probably where the horror lies, but it's not like, I don't know, it's not, I can't handle like Ouija boards and paranormal stuff, so that's fine for me. My second book is Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. That's a sci-fi thriller about a guy who is like abducted and taken to an alternate reality. This is probably more of your standard sci-fi thriller. I think it's getting made into a TV show, actually. It's really exciting. But yeah, this was an amazing book, and it's about this guy who's taken away from his family, and he's put into a different world, and he wakes up, and because everyone's got like a mirror copy in this other world, everyone assumes he's someone else, and he has to kind of blag his way through this other world, and trying to get home to find that his alternate self is kind of like abducted his family, and he's got to try and get them back, and it's really, really clever. So that's that one. And then a couple of YA ones for you. The Loneliest Girl in the Universe. I think we've talked about this one before, but it's so good. It's got such a good twist, and it's about this girl who's alone on a spaceship because her parents have died, and there's this other spaceship slowly catching up to hers, and she's talking to it, communicating with it, because she's all alone, and this guy on this spaceship is telling her basically everything she wants to hear, and by the time that the two spaceships meet up and they dock, it's sort of about this big reveal of who she was actually been talking to. It's really good. And then my other one is called Contagion by Erin Bowman, and that was really good. That is probably more of a sci-fi horror again. That is this one's YA. It's about a crew who respond to a distress signal on this planet, and it really made me laugh, actually, because it's US publishing. I think they don't like swearing in books. But this one, so this crew touched down on this planet. Their spaceship is quickly scuppered. They can't escape. They're trapped on this planet with a bunch of dead people who are coming back to life. People are catching this disease. It's making their eyes hemorrhage. It's making their nose bleed. And no one swears at all. There's no F-bombs dropped.
Oh dear.
Yeah, basically, it's like you're trapped on this planet. Everyone's bleeding out of their eyes, and no one's dropped an F-bomb. But it's really, really clever. It's really good, and it's a duology as well, and that's really good too.
Cool.
So I really like that one. I have a couple more if you've got time.
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Okay. This one is called The Mother Code by Kyle Stivers. This one is a pandemic book about a pandemic. So I actually read this early COVID days, and I'm not. It was a little bit kind of like I'm reading about a pandemic in a pandemic. I'm not sure, but it's about the future of humans. Like there's this disease that breaks out, and basically we invent robots to help humanity survive. And every child has got like this robot mother that looks after them and stuff, and it's all about the bond between this children and their robot mother. It's actually really good. But yeah, about a pandemic, I'm not sure to know.
Might be a good way for people to explore it if they want to at this
point. I feel sorry for that author actually, because it's obviously just such bad timing, because there's other books about pandemics, aren't there, that have done really well, and that one just hit such a wrong time, bless her. This one is 1,000 Pieces of You by Claudia Gray. This one's kind of like a sci-fi romance. It's about a girl who can hop universes, and she's trying to find the murderer of her father who escaped into an alternate universe. And she's like an artist, and she's not techie at all. And she takes along her father's research assistant, and they fall in love, and it's brilliant. Yeah, so I really like that one too. So yeah, those are all my recommendations.
Oh, thank you. They're such good recommendations. I can see why you've chosen the kind of the bits of romance and the different sci-fi songs. I'd love to see you write a space book, Naomi. I think that needs
I would love to write a space one. Yeah, I'd really like to gravitate towards that, but I don't think space sells that well, so it's finding a publisher who would take it. If you're watching, publisher.
Yeah, I mean, it's like when you think of stuff like The Martian, like certain ones can really break through, can't they, and do amazing. So yeah, I don't know. Sure. I always think when a trend doesn't seem like it's trendy, maybe just try it anyway. Like to plot something out and do a little write and see if you think there's anything there. Because I'd read it. That's one reason.
Thanks.
I'd read everything you write. You know I would. But
bless you. Thanks, Amy.
So thank you so much, Naomi. I think that's all the things I wanted to talk about and more. As always, I've enjoyed talking to you a lot.
Thanks, Amy.
For people who've watched this far, obviously you need to read Naomi's books, Every Line of You and Game Over Girl. If you want some sci-fi, some romance and brilliant writing that will keep you guessing, and that's come from a very intelligent brain who's excellent at pointing you in all different directions.
Not sure about that, but thanks.
You must be. I listen to things you say, Naomi, and sometimes I'm like, you're so smart, I'm having to really concentrate.
I don't know about that, but
you are. And you're good at explaining it too, like in the books and in person. You're very good at making the smart things come across to people who are not quite as scientific. So thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you for watching, everyone who's stayed with us, and thank you, Naomi, for joining us. I really appreciate it. I have got some more exciting author interviews lined up, so stay tuned, but we're going to leave you there for now. So thank you so much for watching.
Thank you, Amy. Thanks, everyone. Bye.